Welcome everyone. Here we are, 7 o'clock, starting right on time for Organic Week celebration of dung beetles. And we have with us four fabulous panel specialists on dung beetles. We have Bridget Henderson, who's been involved in land-based organic biodynamic and sustainability education for over 2 decades. She also gave a wonderful presentation at the Underground Festival. She was well supported by Julie Burwell, who's also here, although without camera. And she's farming in Arapuni, South Waikato, and participated in the wonderful talk about dung beetles also at the Underground Festival in Waipapa earlier in the year. We have also with us Paul Candy, environmentally conscious and right into dung beetles on a lifestyle block in Helensville. And our final expert is Stephen Newman, and he's farming near Whangarei. He's into IT for his day job, but with a real passion for pastoral farming. So, Bridget, over to you. Would you like to give us an introduction to dung beetles?
Cool. Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming along tonight on a Monday night. It's very impressive. We are really glad to be here, and we are who David just introduced us all. Loosely, we call ourselves the Dung Beetle Network of New Zealand. That's more kind of for fun than anything. We're just really enthusiastic about beetles, and we want to promote and beetles and share our knowledge and also share beetles. So yeah, happy Organic Week. It's really good to be part of this. And I wanted to start with a quote, if that's okay. So I was thinking about beetles and something that there's something that's not really often appreciated because they're invisible. The work that they do isn't often seen, and also there's not a lot of awareness about them. And it made me think about the soil and how it's actually the same. The soil is so, essential to life, yet it's often underappreciated because it's underneath our feet and we can't see it. So this is a quote from Wendell Berry. "The soil is the greatest connector of lives, the source and destination of all. It is the healer and restorer and resurrector, by which disease passes into health, age into youth, death into life. Without proper care for it, we can have no community, because without proper care for it, we can have no life." So I thought, since it was Organic Week, it was just good to kind of focus on that and the importance of soil and the importance of dung beetles to soil. So let's get started. Okay.
You're absolutely right there, Bridget. We've got 4 inches of topsoil under our feet, the infinite miles of space above us, and thousands of miles of rock beneath us, and we live off that 4 inches. So everything we can do to enhance it is entirely worth our while.
Thank you. Which reminds me, we're going to try and I was going to try and thinking we would make this interactive, but as you guys aren't on the screen with us, just put all your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end of it. Yeah, that'd be good. All right, so today we're going to talk about the history, first of all, the background within New Zealand of dung beetles, the different types of dung beetles that there are, the life cycles, the benefits, rearing versus releasing, and then an on-farm success story. So I'm going to be covering the first few things. Paul's going to come in to talk about benefits. Stephen's going to cover rearing versus releasing, and then we're going to end with Julie talking about her on-farm success story, and then have our questions or discussion, whichever way we do it. So dung beetles have been around for a whopping 115 million years. And there must have been some more research done recently because last time I checked it was 40 million. So I've updated my slide, 115 million, which is just really mind-boggling. Of course, whenever there's been dung on the planet, there's been dung beetles. That's the way that nature works. There's always a way to recycle whatever would otherwise become waste. So all in all, there are 7,000 species of dung beetles. And all those species have developed to coexist with an animal. So as mammals diversified and developed, which happened about 66 million years ago, so did the dung beetles. So as I said, there's a dung beetle for pretty much every creature in every environment on Earth, except for Antarctica. They're in every continent around the world except for Antarctica, and I think that's for kind of obvious reasons. So if we fast forward, it's the first time that humans kind of clock the dung beetle, and it's pretty massive. The ancient Egyptians worshipped the dung beetle. To them, it was a sacred creature, the sacred scarab, it was called, coming from the zoological name for dung beetle, which is Scarabaeidae. For them, it represented the sun god called Khepri, and the beetles, they believed that the dung beetle rolled the sun around the sky and continued to roll it underground as it went for them below the horizon. So in New Zealand, we do have, as I was saying, there's dung beetles for every on every continent, and for every animal that produces dung, there is a dung beetle that works with that animal. So in New Zealand, we do have native dung beetles, and I don't know if you can see, there's a scale bar there. So 1 millimeter is the little line beside those beetles. So these guys are only about 10 millimeters long maximum. So they're really tiny. And if you can imagine the dung that they would be working, which is of course bird, predominantly bird dung, and pre-human times in New Zealand, they would just be living entirely their whole lives in the forest. They don't fly, so all they would be doing was living on and eating the bird dung. So then if you think about the modern habitat in New Zealand, they would be, of course, in the forest, which they would never leave. But we now have cleared land, a lot of it, which is filled with dung-producing animals. So we have a bit of an issue in New Zealand, which we're now going to go and talk about. So the early colonists came across in their boats and they brought the animals with them. But unfortunately for the land, they didn't bring any dung beetles. There were no dung beetles on the boats. There was, however, a successful introduction, but that might we have to wait for another discussion. So it's estimated that there is over 100 million tonnes of dung produced, deposited on New Zealand pastures in 1 year. A lot of people would think that's just a massive problem, and it is to a degree, but it needn't be. It's actually an incredible resource, and those in the biodynamic community would believe this very strongly. It can be used for all sorts of things, and of course, it's meant to go underground. This is the whole purpose of these animals producing the dung, that it's part of the ecosystem, it's part of nature's cycle. It's constantly meant to be recycled through the soil back into the grass growth, and then so the cycle continues on and on. For a dung beetle, this beautiful looking dung pad here is prime real estate. Now, I tried to get this as small as I possibly could, but that's not small enough. This is the size of a native dung beetle compared to a dung pad. So as you can imagine, they would have no chance of being able to deal with the amount of dung that's on New Zealand pastures, not to mention the fact that they don't fly. Imported exotic dung beetles do fly. That's how they find the dung. And they spend their lives in the forest under the tree canopy, living off the bird dung. So they never actually leave the forest. So finally, someone did something about it. In the 1960s, someone brought dung beetles into New Zealand. They were a very forward-thinking person, and I just think it's incredible that it took us a very long time to work out that we needed dung beetles in New Zealand to deal with the dung problem. In 2009, the Dung Beetle Release Strategy Group was formed, which eventually became an organisation called Dung Beetle Innovations. It was started up by an entomologist and two other guys, and the purpose of this business was to import and mass rear dung beetles that were appropriate for dealing with the dung in pastures in New Zealand. So that's when it all started to take off in terms of pastoral dung beetles. I have to say, I have to do a big shout out to Dung Beetle Innovations. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have these exotic dung beetles in New Zealand. And I encourage anyone that can afford to buy these beetles to do it. And also send out a massive thank you to the people that have bought these beetles, because they have spread through these releases around a lot of New Zealand. So yeah, have to give a lot of credit to Dung Beetle Innovations for the work that they do. These little guys are called Copris incertus, otherwise known as Mexican dung beetles. You can see the one at the top there has got his wings sticking out the back. These were the first beetles that were introduced to New Zealand in the 1950s and 60s. They were introduced up in Dargaville area and also down in Nelson, I believe, and I think also somewhere in the Waikato. So there was populations establishing themselves around the 50s and 60s of these guys. So not all dung beetles are the same. There's 3 specific species within the family. So we've got rollers and dwellers and tunnelers. This is just showing a diagram showing the different actions of the different beetles. So first of all, the pad dwellers. These are little ones that just live in the top of the dung pad, and they never go underground. They just kind of move around in the top. They make very little impact on the dung, but they do, to some extent, do a little bit of breaking it up. Then we've got the rollers. Now, these are the ones that you often hear about and see on the nature shows. These are kind of, I like to call them the rock stars of the dung beetle world. These are the guys that roll, that make the balls above ground and then roll them by pushing them backwards along the ground to the spot where they're going to bury them. They're often very active in desert settings where the dung is very scarce, so there's a lot of competition, which is why they take it up and roll it away. And they are trying to bury it in an area which isn't so hot. So there's sort of dual purpose to what they're doing. I forgot to say before that dung beetles are the strongest creature relative to their size, and they can push 1,150 times their body weight, which for us would be like pushing 6 double-decker buses. So they're incredibly strong, and they're able to bury about 50 times of dung and 50 times their own weight in dung in 24 hours. So the last group of beetles are called the tunnelers, and these are the guys that we're going to be talking about today. So these are the ones that are active directly under the dung pad and are creating channels and caverns underneath the dung pad and pulling the dung down into those caverns, fashioning it into balls, into brood balls, and then laying an egg into each of those brood balls. So, of course, when the dung beetle group were choosing where to get their beetles from, they tried to select beetles from places that would be suitable for New Zealand conditions. So this is a lovely graphic from Dung Beetle Innovations website. This is showing the life cycle of the dung beetles. So starting at the top, the beetles emerge, they fly, which is that amazing picture there of the beetle with its wings out. They're attracted to the smell of the dung, and that's how they find it. Once they're there, they'll find a pair. They'll bond with another beetle and get busy mating and nesting. So they, as I mentioned, they dig their caverns under the dung pad, and depending on the species, will depend on how deep they will go. The bigger ones can go down a couple of feet, and the smaller ones stay quite close to the surface, about 30 or so centimetres below the surface. So once the dung ball has been fashioned into a brood ball, the female will lay the egg inside it and then close it up, and the eggs hatch out within the ball underground and start to eat as a larvae will start to eat the inside of the dung ball, and that's what sustains them. And they feed on that until they get to the pupae stage, when they pupate for a couple of months or weeks, depending on their species, and then eventually will hatch out of it by chewing out through the dung ball and crawling up to the surface and emerging full adult size, and then flying off and starting the whole thing again. So just back to our beautiful cow paddy here. the prime real estate. When the beetles are working through their life cycle, you'll be able to notice it at different stages on the paddock. So this is what we call the feeding phase. So when they come out, when they first hatch out, or if they've been hibernating over winter or summer, depending on their species, they'll hatch out and they go into a kind of feeding frenzy. They'll fly to the nearest dung pad that they can find, and they'll just fall into it and just eat and eat and eat. And they do that for a couple of days till they've got enough food to sort of do what they need to do. And then they bury themselves underground to sexually mature. And again, the time they do that for differs depending on their species. But eventually they will come up, and then they'll be in the breeding phase. And this is when you start to see this in the paddocks. So if you look, you can see there's some holes in the top of the dung pad there, and the beetles have gone underground, and then got busy excavating out the soil underneath. So all those little soil mounds that you can see around the dung pad is the soil from underneath the pad that the beetles are now going to drag down that dung and use it to lay their eggs in. So people often ask if dung beetles will work sheep pellets. Yes, they do, and here's the proof. They prefer, I think if they had their choice, they would go for cow dung just because there's so much of it and it's a great consistency. But they also work sheep, poo, horse, alpaca, deer, goats, really any herbivore, any pasture dweller. They do not work pig or chicken or dog or human manure, as far as I know. I have seen them at my place when there's been a really large amount of beetles around, kind of give it a go. But, I don't think they get very far. So, yeah, there would, of course, be other beetles around them, available that would do those things. I mean, yeah, most of them. Can't really comment on the human, but probably the beetles that would work the pig manure would maybe perhaps be interested in ours. Something to not think about, really.
Well, 7,000 worldwide, there must be some that are adapted to humans.
You would think so, eh? Yeah. Okay, so now we have got to talking about the benefits of dung beetles, and this is where I'd like to hand over to Paul Candy, who's going to be talking about it from a regenerative perspective. So take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Bridget, and good evening, everybody. My name's Paul Candy. Great to see so many people come online and take an interest in dung beetles. It's one thing that sort of has kind of always fascinated me, is how interested I've become in dung beetles and how much you tend to learn new things all the time. And even with Bridget's presentation, I've learned a couple of things tonight. So the key benefit of dung beetles, well, their primary function is to reduce the dung, remove the dung from the surface of the pasture. So rather than it taking weeks and weeks to break down, they can do it in days. And all the benefits that follow on from that, I've got about 10 sort of different benefits just here that I know of. So once the dung is removed, of course, it increases the available grazing area. So the livestock can graze the pasture more evenly the next time around, because the dung is no longer sort of soiling the pasture. So that's probably the most obvious key benefit. Immediately the dung is gone, that area is able to recover much more quickly. So, of course, once the pasture has recovered, you get much more production, better utilization, so the land is actually becoming a lot more productive. It also reduces soil compaction, and with the tunneling action of the beetles, they're bringing up soil from deep down. They're creating air channels in the soil. And one of the things that New Zealand agriculture suffers from quite badly is the compaction. I think it's something like 80% of New Zealand farmland is quite badly compacted. So these guys do a fantastic job aerating the soil. And not only do they aerate it, and by taking the dung into the soil, and you can see from the picture on the screen, there's little channels, and that also allows the water to get in, because basically every living being relies on air and moisture. So the dung beetle is actually allowing both those things to happen at the same time. So that also, besides the air, it actually increases the benefit to the microbes as well as the roots of the plants, and takes the facility, the manure right into the area that the roots, the plant roots actually are growing. So you're actually taking nutrients directly to the source. One of the key benefits, and this is probably one of the main ones also, is that it improves water quality. When we get big rain events, fresh dung will just tend to get liquefied by a big rain event and run off, and that also carries all the nutrients with it, and E. coli as well. But with the dung being buried in a few days, in a short period of time, that risk is minimized. So we're actually reducing the amount of sediment and runoff and nutrient load into our rivers and streams. So that's probably one of the biggest benefits as well, apart from putting the dung directly into the soil. The beetles actually disrupt the parasite burden, and so when the dung hits the ground, it's generally full of eggs, and then flies come along and lay their eggs in the dung. So those eggs and larvae are taken down into the soil, so it completely disrupts their life cycle, because they're not designed to be dragged down into the soil. And so it eradicates or reduces the need for drenching, and also the fly larvae cycle is broken, so it definitely reduces the number of flies that bother the animals. And like I said, I've already covered the nutrients that have moved deeper into the root zone of the plants, and that's pretty much kind of covers most of the key points. And the other thing too is it lowers your reliance on artificial fertilizers. So you're putting this really natural nutrient source right into the soil where it needs to be. So over time, you're reducing your chemical inputs of artificial fertilizers. So that's pretty much the 10 sort of top points that I would like to sort of cover off. But I want to finish with a little quote, which is one of my favorites. And it is, "Soil is the tablecloth upon which our banquet is served." So thank you, Bridget. I'll pass it back to you.
Great, Paul. Thank you. Wonderful. Could you provide a quick commentary on how dung beetles cope with challenges to any of those metrics that you've listed, like very tough soils or very wet conditions or new compaction?
Interesting. Yep. Well, we've had just recently we've went to a farm and discovered dung beetles in very wet soil, and they seem to have coped remarkably well. Tough soils, I don't know, Bridget. I don't know if is I guess rocky, stony soil would be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, they're designed to deal with the subsoil, so they're pretty good with most soils, but they do drown like other creatures would that need oxygen. So if it's an area that floods, they won't survive. But like Paul just said, it's we did a release recently, and the ground was sopping. And when we got there and turned over a dung pad, we actually found dung beetles already there. So it was showing that they had already established on this farm, and these people didn't even know, which was pretty cool. And the ground was very wet there. Yeah. Yep.
The other thing you do have to bear in mind, and Julie will probably cover this, is the type of chemicals you need to be aware of when you have dung beetles. I'll let Julie cover that one off. But just on the little slide there, you can see the demonstration of with and without dung beetles. So the manure just basically piles up and stops that grass growing, and doesn't sort of grow properly until it's been taken off the pasture and put back into the soil. And it's incredible because cows, like Bridget said, I think it was 100 million tons of dung. So one cow per day can actually cover about a square metre in dung. They poo between about, 15 or 16 times a day, and it's sort of dinner plate size. So you can imagine, 100 cows soon covers a fair bit sort of contaminates a fair bit of soil, a fair bit of grass. So, yeah, definitely a huge advantage having dung beetles in your system. That's for sure.
For the grasses that are underneath a dung patty, that then did the grass die, or did the grass go, wow, phew, thanks for taking that off my head, and carry on growing?
This slide gives you the answer.
Yeah. Yep. So that's pretty much, it's basically taken away almost immediately. I've seen dung that's had no dung beetles, and it's probably been there for 8 or 9 months, possibly even 12 months. It's dry, it's hard, and you can pick it up, throw it like a frisbee. Nothing's growing underneath it. So when you have very low biology in your soil, that's when you have that issue. But as you can see from that slide on the right-hand side with dung beetles, it doesn't have that issue because you're immediately relieving the problem.
Fabulous. It just seems like such a win-win-win all around. There's just no reason not to.
It totally is, yeah.
Totally. So this is a demonstration that was made up to take to field days. So it's essentially two, panes of glass that have been put together, been filled with, closed off at the bottom and sides, filled with soil, and then had dung put on top and some grass seeds put on top of that, and then had dung beetles put into it. So you can actually see on the right is the bigger species, how deep they go, and on the left is the smaller species. So it just shows you in vivid detail exactly what it is that they're doing under the ground. And this is just that photo again that we used before without writing all over it, so you can really clearly see what the dung beetles are doing, how they're dragging down the dung and creating these caverns underground. Yeah. So we could probably talk about the benefits of dung beetles. There's so many for the rest of the night, but we better move on to a new topic. So we're going to talk about, Stephen's going to come in here and talk about rearing and releasing, which is within our group. We've been doing both of these things. So I'll hand over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Bridget. Thanks, Paul. So I'm rearing dung beetles. There's a specific type I'm rearing, the bigger one, the larger one, because around our area we have a lot of the Mexican ones, which is a smaller breed. So I'm breeding the larger one, and I released a whole lot this season. Well, I didn't. Bridget came around while I was away and did all that for me. And the reason I wanted to do that is there's two reasons. There's one, as you saw in that picture before with the larger dung beetles, they're getting deeper. They're getting right down, further down into the soil past the topsoil layer and taking the dung down deep. And so what that's allowing to happen is, as Paul was talking about, is the air, the water, everything getting down, the biology that is creating through all this at that level allows the plant roots to go deeper and deeper because the soil is becoming more alive with microorganisms and everything like that. So the soil becomes more active and deeper. And so they'll handle droughts better, things like that. So that's why I'm trying to get the larger dung beetles going on my property. And the other reason I breed them is to give them away. So not everyone, so a lot of people I see in the comments have said, yeah, I've got some dung beetles and that, but most of them will have, I'm assuming, the Mexican, the smaller ones. And so I'm breeding the larger ones, and when we find areas that don't have them, Bridget's sort of putting a list together of where to send beetles out for free to people, but you can only do so many. Now, so breeding them is just a normal sort of chore at the moment. I'm feeding mine every 4 days. Actually, I forgot to feed them today, so tomorrow will be 5 days. So there will be, most of those patties you'll see there, they're all in IBC bins, and most of those patties will be disappeared. They'll be eaten and taken into the bed. into their holes, and that is made up of clay, 50% clay and 50% washed sand. So it's an easy home to dig into, but it doesn't collapse. That's one of the key things. It doesn't collapse on them. And so, yeah, so I'm just breeding them there, and they are very active at the moment. They're eating a lot, and then they'll go into hibernation, as you saw that life cycle that Bridget spoke about. And then about November, they come out of hibernation, start eating again, and that's when they'll go crazy. I'm, changing the dung constantly, and then back into hibernation, and then I actually catch them in November, December, and then put them into small bins until about March, when they then become active again and start the whole life cycle again. And so we then lay them all out on a mat and sex them, get a whole lot of breeding pairs again for next season, and then we have a whole lot left over that we either give away or I release. So yeah, so that's the breeding. It's mainly, I mean, if you're just wanting to release dung beetles on your property, you're breeding them. So it's only if you want to breed them is to try and get a specific breed, or you're going to be giving them away. Yeah, that would be the rationale behind breeding. Any comments on that, Bridget?
I was just going to say it's probably a good time to mention the dig because of
Yes.
those videos and yeah.
Yeah. So Quorum Sense, we're all part of Quorum Sense. I don't know if everyone's heard of that, but they have an online forum called The Dig. It's a bit of software called Slack, and in there is a channel for dung beetles, and you'll see all the videos posted about the journey during the year that I have had with the dung beetles, so you can learn how to breed them if you want to. So you can, I'll see if we can get David, if anyone's interested, to send out the link to sign up to Quorum Sense. The Dig, it's free, and then you just many channels on there and different topics, all about regenerative practices, and dung beetles is one part of that regenerative practice. So yeah,
And it'd be great. We're kind of hoping that can become the sort of hub for sharing dung beetles as well. So
yes.
there's been a few people posting, I'm in wherever, Canterbury, anyone around here have dung beetles. And once we kind of get the word out there, we're hoping that's where people will start to share to share their beetles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can courier them around the countryside.
Yeah. Okay. So do you want to keep going, Stephen, or do you want me to?
Okay. So when actually, it's a good point about releasing the dung beetles. So when their biggest predator is birds. So when you first get them, you want to put them in the patty, not on top, because you don't put the whole lot in one area. You sort of put a few in a patty here and a few in a cow pat over there. And so if you leave them on top and you walk off, last thing we want is a whole lot of birds coming in and grabbing them. And there goes your little investment in dung beetles. So you'll see here Paul and Miriam, it looks like, opening up a paddy on my property and putting a few of the dung beetles in, and then they'll put the paddy back on top so they're protected. So yeah, that's so they're releasing them. It's pretty simple. Just make sure you're not letting the birds get them. And Paul mentioned before about drenching. So for example, my farm, we don't drench at all, but there are some dung beetle friendly drenches. Sorry. So a lot of drenches do kill dung beetles. So it comes out in their cow pat, they eat it, and they will die. So be careful if you're drenching. Do some homework and see what drenches are dung beetle friendly. Because I saw a couple of comments here is that, yeah, we've got dung beetles, but they're not in the masses. I think I saw a comment. And the first question I'll be asking is, are you drenching, and what drench are you using? That's what that could be the reasons why they haven't got more thicker and thicker in volume on your property. Now, one of the things, there's one one thing they don't have a boundary. They don't know where the boundary is, so they all disappear onto the neighbours. So if you are releasing dung beetles, it does pay to have a chat with your neighbour and just tell them what you're doing and talk to them about drenches, because you want them to get established. So if you're the only block that's doing it and everyone else is drenching and killing them, so yeah, have a chat to your neighbours about it.
It'd be nice if they respected you back the other way by saying they were drenching and that drench is running off onto your place.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Anything to add on this one, Bridget?
Yeah, just to sort of keep in mind, like since I've been doing stuff with dung beetles, and especially now that we're really trying to promote them, there's a lot of enthusiastic people that would like to have dung beetles on their properties, but there's actually quite a high criteria to have the beetles at your place, especially if we're going to be supplying you with those beetles. And yeah, it's just to keep in mind things like, for example, dung supply. So you need to have a constant supply of dung on your land. I've had people ask for beetles, and when I question them, they actually ends up they don't have animals at all. So I'm kind of like, so how's that going to work? The other thing is the climate. So like we talked about, flooding, which isn't really climate, but climate, there are some beetles, there's 11 species that were imported by Dung Beetle Innovations. There's probably about 4 or 5 that are really prolific now, but they don't survive in all areas of New Zealand. So you need to be sure that you're getting the right species. And there's actually there's heaps of information on the Dung Beetle Innovations website about those sorts of things, those sorts of details. Drenching, Steve mentioned. Soil disturbance is a big one. Harrowing is about the worst thing you could do if you just release some dung beetles, because they'll all be sitting there in the dung pads feeding. And if you go around with your harrow to break up the dung, it's going to kill them. So also soil cultivation can be a real problem. If you have cows, in your paddocks one year and the next year you're going to grow maize, and you just basically go through and rip up the beetles that are hibernating or nesting, that can be a big problem too. Predators we talked about. I'm thinking about a property where actually, Steve and Jenny, it's your place, Cow Springs. We introduced dung beetles there a couple of years ago now, and there was a lot of pukekos because there's a beautiful river that runs through there. So there's a lot of pukekos on site. It was also some areas that got a bit wet, and there was also quite a big distance between paddocks. So sometimes the cows were down one end of the farm and sometimes up the other. And so we released them kind of thinking, oh, well, we'll see what happens. And I can't, maybe one of you guys can put it in the chat how long ago we released them. But recently I was down visiting and we went out into the pasture and we found dung beetles. So even on a property where there are these potential issues, they can work. And in my area, which is South Head, northwest of Auckland, it's a peninsula, they have survived all sorts of conventional farming practices and spread despite all those things that are going on. So they really do, you have to be careful, but they can survive all sorts of things. It might just take them longer to get established. Surrounding land use is worth mentioning. So that's if you get dung beetles and you have farms around you with a good supply of dung, then you can get away with not having many animals yourself because, of course, like Steve said, they will fly to the smell of the dung. And if you don't have enough dung in your place, they'll find it somewhere else. But they will come back. They just, they don't observe boundary lines, which can be a great thing if you're the lucky person who gets them flying onto your place without paying for them. Yeah.
Actually, one thing I want to mention is they do take about 4 years to actually to release to seeing an establishment. So you might think, oh, that was a waste of money. Year 2, year 3, I'm not seeing anything. It takes about 4 years before you start to see them. So yeah, don't expect to see huge numbers in the next year because they only have about 7, 8 eggs per couple. Is that right, Bridget? 7 or 8 eggs?
It depends on the species.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, the bigger species, like the ones that you're breeding, would have 4 in
Yeah.
a season. And then the smaller species would have a few more generations than that. Yeah.
And
Yes, it does
Heather
take time.
asks how long they live for, Bridget.
That all depends as well on the species. So the bigger species, which are in this picture here, that they're called the spinnacher, Geotropes spinnacher, they can live for up to 2 years maximum. So they survive their winter active, and they emerged not so long ago, about now, end of autumn, and they'll be now in their breeding phase, and they will live for about 18 months, 2 years. The smaller species probably would, if they were, they would live for 6 to 12 months, depending on the conditions. So yeah, a lot shorter. Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of that release cycle, Stephen, were you talking March when you were distributing them, or does it not matter?
They start the breed I had started hatching out in coming out. They hatch in November, but then go back and hibernate for a while longer. And then about March, I think it was, we started going through it. Was that right, Bridget? It was a bit late this season.
That's right.
It was later than normal.
Yeah.
The reason I'm a bit vague, I was away. So thank goodness Bridget was in town.
How convenient.
So that March period, is that the only capture and release time of the year, when they'll be distributed?
So again, it depends on the species. Dung beetle innovations I think they've got about six or 7 species out there, but in the area where I live, I've only got 4 in my surrounding area. So yeah, a winter active, an autumn and spring active, they're the Mexicans, and then which are the ones that were released in the 50s, 60s, and then 2 species that are summer active, and they're the little guys. There was a comment earlier from someone called Matt Long. He says that the Mexicans were released on his property, which is pretty cool. And yeah, we're saying they're slow to establish, and that's absolutely right. So the Mexican beetles are slightly different from the other beetles. They will, the female will stay with the eggs underground, which means that they breed a lot slower. But perhaps because of that, because of having the protection from the female, they have a better success rate. And it's the Mexican beetles that are the most prolific. They're the ones that were released in the 50s. And at Shelley Beach, Southhead, the area where I live, they were released in the 90s, and they've now basically spread throughout the whole peninsula really well, and as far down as, getting right back down to Parakai and Helensville for those that know the area.
And so they'll just continue to walk south and east from there until they get to Stewart
The
Island, I
city.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also someone asking how many are you putting in a cow pat. Doesn't really matter because they will fly. They'll hide and then they'll fly and spread themselves around. So when you're actually releasing them, it doesn't matter too much. You don't want to overfill it because it might cause them to fly early when it's dangerous and they might get eaten by birds. So yeah, just a handful. It doesn't have to be specific or perfect.
Actually, I just mentioned something else that I was planning on doing. This winter, I was planning on feeding my cows a bit of biochar. Biochar is not a feed supplement or anything, but they will eat it and charge it inside their ruminant, hopefully, and then poop it out. And the dung beetles will take that down as well into the soil. So, humates and biochar, things like that, they'll take it right down into the soil, and another little helper to help the soil to develop deep.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Fabulous. It all just goes together, doesn't it?
Mm.
Gary Hayman comments that they spread along the valleys but won't cross the ridge or bush lines, which
Yeah.
kind of makes sense.
Yep, I would agree with that. But like I said, it's amazing given time where they can go and what they do. But definitely having big shelter belts, thick shelter belts, or bush areas, like Gary says, is a deterrent to flying. Yeah, so it helps to have a connected grazing system grazing management, which is why dairy farms are the perfect place to have them proliferate, especially organic dairy farms.
The organic dairy farm collaboration groups must talk about this amongst themselves already.
What was that, sorry?
The organic dairy farmers get together in a sharing group every month or two. They must already be aware of this and talk about it.
Yep. Yep, there's a lot of interest. Yep.
Is that our little intro to Julie?
Yeah, I can't see Julie on the screen.
That's because she's just
She is
moved.
there.
There she is.
Oh, is she?
She's on
Okay.
mute. Here she comes.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah, I am here.
Yay. I'll just go to the next slide. So we're going to hear from Julie now about her success story with dung beetles on her place down in the Waikato. And Julie, I'll just let you introduce yourself and talk about what's happening down there.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for coming, and apologies, I can't get my video working. I'm not computer literate at all. So anyway, we live in the South Waikato in Arapuni, and we're on a family dairy farm. We're conventional. We are not organic. We're definitely regen, but we haven't certified organic. In 2022, we bought a farm package of off Dung Beetle Innovations, and over about 4 months, we released 4 different species. They've been really successful. The Bonodos, we saw the first year. Admittedly, I was definitely curious, and we only saw very small amounts of numbers, but we did see them. And 4 years later, they are now prolific and doing a great job. We bought them originally. I'm a bit of a cow fan. I'm really interested in breeding and genetics, but I am worried about drench resistant. I know people who have given up sheep farming, especially, just because they can't get over drench resistance and they're having so much trouble. And I think we're all putting our heads in the sand if we think it's going to go away and some magic drug's going to come along, because there aren't any. So we've been breeding for parasite resistance and having a lot of success with that. And I just thought dung beetles made a lot of sense as another way of dealing with parasites, apart from all the other great things they do. We do drench our young stock if they need it. So nobody gets more than 2 drenches in their life, or they don't stay, and we don't drench adult stock at all. When we drench a calf or the calves, they go into a specific paddock. We have one small paddock, and they stay there for 48 hours. And I would have to say that I don't think that it is. We are using the beetle friendly drenches, and I don't think we have impacted the beetles at all by doing that. And yeah, they seem to work on the calves. So, and hopefully we'll get to the stage where we don't need to drench at all. We live very close to the Waikato River, so anything we can do, any little piece of the puzzle to stop our nutrients leaving the farm and ending up in the river. I'm also very keen on hanging on to all those nutrients, because fertilizer ain't cheap. So that nutrient recycling is really important to us. What else? Yeah. Hopefully my other species are going to turn up one day. So yeah, that would be nice. So I collect dung off for my compost, and one morning I was milking and I had my bucket ready to collect the dung out from our cow shed. We have a concrete race with rubber mats on it, and as the cows walked out, somebody did a nice paddy for me, and I went out to get it, and it had a beetle in it already. I thought he was very game because there was, like 6 inches of concrete and 2 inches of rubber, but they seem to just survive. I wanted to say their favourite paddocks are the chicory paddocks. When the cows are in the chicory paddocks, the beetles are really active for 5 or 6 days afterwards, and I don't find that in the other paddocks. So I don't know whether it's easier to bury their eggs, but yeah, they do really like those chicory paddocks.
And has your quarantine paddock got a slightly lower beetle count?
I have seen beetles in there, David, definitely. Yeah, I don't think so, but I am using the beetle-friendly drenches, which is on the Dung Beetle Innovations website. There's really good information about it, and I have been using them. And I don't know that there's any less beetles in those paddocks.
Okay. You guys are all North Islanders. Annie asks if there's any South Island success stories for dung beetles.
I believe so. I don't know of any personally, but according to Sean from Dung Beetle Innovations, there's definite confirmed established populations down there. So I would say yes. I mean, that'd be a great question to post on the dig on our Dung Beetle chat to see what came back.
Right. And presumably the dung beetles will adapt over time. If there's 7,000 species already, they're quite inclined to adapt to the conditions they find locally.
I think it would take them a while. I think those sorts of things take quite a while for nature to happen in nature. But yeah, I mean, yeah, if things go well for Dung Beetle Innovations, they may end up importing more species. Because of course, you never really know what you're going to get till they get over here. I mean, you know what you're getting, but you don't know how they will take to the New Zealand conditions. So some of the beetles, for example, the spinnaker beetles, the big blue beetles, I was talking to Sean recently and from Dung Beetle Innovations, he said that they're not doing so well up north because it's just too hot for them. It's too warm for them up there. So Auckland is kind of like is borderline for them. Yeah, so, but they do, as someone commented in the chat, they have 11 species, and the idea is that there's a beetle for every part of New Zealand. Yeah.
Right. And presumably there would have been giant dung beetles for moa. Is there any archaeological evidence of those?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I have never heard anything about that. Perhaps they died out when the moa did.
Well,
If
quite
they was
likely, yeah.
specifically for moa. Yeah, I'm not sure. Good question. Yeah.
Matt comments that he found a study some years ago that showed even with regular drenching, if there's a high larval challenge, stock performance is adversely affected, which of course makes sense. There should be a major advantage of dung beetles for people who don't clean up pastures by rotating sheep and cattle. And I think we see a lot of that in lifestyle block farms, overgrazing or too long a term grazing of a paddock.
True. There was a question before from Heather. Hello, Heather, from Magnolia Dairy. she was asking about on a dairy farm, the effluent ponds, whether that's a problem, whether the beetles would drown. It's actually a really good question. And it's something I've often wondered about, and I have had a look, but I've never seen beetles in there, but that doesn't mean they haven't been in there and drowned. And perhaps that they definitely get attracted to things that are smelly, even if it's not dung. We had a situation at the farm where I live, which turned into a really interesting experiment, actually. So we make fish fertilizer from stingray and shark, and the dregs, the tanks were emptied, and the dregs, which is kind of like this white sludgy stuff, was put onto the pasture. And the poor dung beetles thought that was the most amazing smelling thing that they'd ever smelt. And so they went in there in their droves. And when there's a lot of dung beetles that are sort of competing for food, you can actually hear them squeaking. And you could hear it as you're walking up to this area from quite far away. I hope that they all managed to fly out of there and go and find real poo. But that sort of proves that, yeah, we used to have to cover our fish fertilizer tanks with mesh because the beetles would definitely try and get in there. So they're attracted to, I think in the absence of dung, enough dung, they will go for anything that smells good or bad, according to how you look at it. So yeah, that's a good question, Heather. I think you'd probably use some. But on a dairy farm, there would be a much stronger smell coming from the fresh dung. So I think that, it wouldn't adversely affect them too much.
Have you ever seen the rafts that are used to allow bees to access water? And might that work on effluent ponds? So there's like somewhere to land and then they can eat a bit of dung and fly away, or
I
not
wouldn't
really
think
their
so.
thing?
No, and they're more likely just to dive in where it smells great, where it smells good. Yeah. There was another question. Sorry, I'm not trying to do your job, David, but it just popped up earlier.
Sure, go ahead.
Someone asking about the negatives of dung beetles. And if I was pushed, I would say the only negative would be that if you're making compost and you have a really good dung beetle population, it's quite hard sometimes to harvest poo off the paddocks because it literally disappears that quickly. And yeah, Stephen will tell you as well, feeding dung beetles in bins at certain time of year, you'll basically be bringing in other beetles in the dung and introducing them into your bins. So it's if you have a use for dung and you need to collect it, that can be a downside, but in a way that's actually evidence that your system's working really well. So I'm going to say no, there's no downsides. Yeah.
So I guess, Stephen, you must have to go and pick up dung from places where there are no dung beetles to keep your team going. Oh, you're on mute.
So at this stage, I'm not like Julie, where Julie's got a huge population. I'm still developing, so I can go out there and happily scoop it up. So yeah, so in a few years' time, that might be a lot harder when I've got a bigger volume of dung beetles on the property.
Oh, now, here's an interesting comment from Gary, who's obviously very experienced with dung beetles. As the worm activity under the dung attracts wild pigs, which rip up the pasture. And I know I've seen myself a 100-acre paddock torn to pieces by pigs coming out of the bush, which I guess is an unintended consequence of dung beetles.
I mean, really, that's sort of similar to my comment about collecting the dung. It's a good thing. Your paddock's full of worms. That's fantastic.
I mean, any paddock with dung beetles or without dung beetles, if the paddock is alive with biology, it's thriving, it's going to
Yeah.
have a huge amount of worms.
Yeah,
So you're
so
going to have that pig problem with or without the dung beetles.
that's right. It's kind of evidence of a good system. And
Mhm.
actually, I'm really pleased to read that comment because one question we had at the Underground Festival was that this person was concerned about the impact that dung beetles might have on worms in terms of competition or decreasing their, effectiveness. But I can now say, actually, it's the opposite is true, according to Gary. So that's good news.
Mm.
Do you have anything more to add, Julie? Oh,
Um,
you're breeding now as well?
so yeah, so I'm breeding in bins as well. So we've mostly got Binotis on farm, and I'm breeding the same. I'm breeding the big power beetle in bins, and I collect my feed for my bins in the cowshed in the morning, and that seems to work fine. Yeah.
Oh yeah, got one more slide. Do you want to talk to this slide, Julie? The
Okay,
binotis.
so the Binotis, this is in Matamata. So I've got a really good friend in Matamata, Fran and Scott, and they didn't buy beetles. They haven't purchased beetles, but they have gone down the regen path with a vengeance, and I'm really, really pleased. And the beetles have just turned up, and the picture is from their property. And I've had 3 or 4 other people that are in the Matamata area, right out to Rotorangi, who have not introduced beetles, who now have beetles, in millions of beetles. So this is really good. This is what we want to see. We want to see them spread around all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a good friend in Tiamutu, and she was out checking the cows one evening just on dusk, and she came across the spinnacher beetle. And yeah. So, and they hadn't purchased them either, and none of their neighbours had purchased them, and they're very conventional farmers, but they're doing well. She's been monitoring them, and they're still there, and then they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So they're survivors.
That's awesome.
Have any entomologists done any population modelling on when saturation will be reached and breed and release is no longer required?
In New Zealand, you mean, in the whole of New
Yes.
Zealand?
Yeah, New Zealand, yeah.
That I think they thought it would take about 15 to 20 years. That they'd be out of business. That Dung Beetle Innovations would be out of business. But yeah,
Sort of seems like it's going to be longer than that, though.
I think so. Yeah. The price is an issue for a lot of people. But however, as someone said on the dig, sort of like, don't make me laugh. Dung beetles are too expensive. When you consider what they can do for your land, that's something that that is absolutely worth the money. But it is hard because, unless you have there are no absolute guarantees. For example, they'll fly to your neighbours, and things can happen. But I have a good story from my neighbour who's a dairy farmer, a conventional one, but open-minded. Dung beetles spread from our place to his, of course. And one day he was putting in a strainer post, digging out a strainer post, and he said he found dung beetle channels as deep as the strainer went. And he kind of said to me, if you'd told me, back then that I would have that sort of dung being buried in my pasture, I would have paid the money up front. So it's like he really couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe how effective they were. Yeah.
Nothing else gets that deep, does it?
That's right. Yeah.
Malone Rogers asks if there's any implications on native wildlife and biodiversity. It wouldn't seem there's any macro effects because the dung sits there for 12 months, so it's nothing else that's coming along and eating that. But there might be micro impacts, although again the dung's still sitting there. So this would seem to be just the most beneficial of introductions.
I think so because I'm not sure exactly the detail of the question, but I mean in terms of a pasture ecosystem that we're talking about, beetles are meant to be in that system to complete it. They're actually missing, a lot of times they're missing from that system. So it makes perfect sense that the beetles are needed in that system, and without it, it's incomplete. So it's kind of, that whole system is imported, but the dung beetles weren't. So we've got this incomplete jigsaw, if you like, and the dung beetles are kind of like the missing piece in that jigsaw to make the whole thing work.
Are you
So they
getting any
wouldn't.
support from bigger organisations like Federated Farmers or MAF or MPI?
So that's not really our gig. That's Dung Beetle Innovations. We're not part of that business. But I know for a fact that Sean is, constantly seeking funding, government funding, working with councils. Paul and Steve have, as part of the Futurereadyfarms project in Auckland, have been. Is it subsidized, or were they actually?
Paul?
Paul?
Subsidised as none of the dung beetles. There is a release group, a catchment group that is actually looking at releasing some free dung beetles in the Rodney catchment, in the Rodney district, Outer Pereira catchment, and a few others around. So I was talking to one of my Future Ready farmers the other day up at Tiari, and he was saying that they have been in touch with him. So yeah, the releases are happening, and yeah, I think, and that was funded by the council.
That's good. Well done. Gary says that Wairarapa Regional Council have also subsidised dung beetles. So if you're in the Wairarapa, work your networks and find out how you can get some beetles there.
Mm-hmm.
There
So
was
one of the things I'd like to see. So I'll just finish off the one of the things I'd like to see, if the councils could collaborate between each other throughout New Zealand. There's no reason why they couldn't be bred by someone like Dung Beetle Innovations and have some funding come from these regional councils to support it, because it's critical that we get these dung beetles out there. And there's absolutely no reason why the councils couldn't link up on this.
Yeah.
Very good. And Gary seems to be quite an expert on this, so I've invited him in to say a few words. Gary, do you want to share some of your experience with dung beetles?
Yep. So I introduced dung beetles in 2018 onto my farm, and the first day I introduced them, I went away on holiday for 5 days. So I got my son to photograph it, and after 5 days, you just saw this stringy mass of dung that was left. It was great to see. We were they were starting to spread, and then we have where we are. We're in the flood zone in Kaipara. We can get up to 1 metre of water across our flats. And I was out on the kayak in the first big flood we had, and we lost a heap of dung beetles. They were floating down the river on the flotsam, clinging to the flotsam.
No.
So that is one thing we have, we have as a problem. But I try to release all of my releases on the hillside. We've introduced 5 different species over the years, trying to cover the season. So I've got a species to cover each season of the year, in theory.
Awesome.
We're starting to get now. We're only now after 8 years now starting to see more consistent dung beetle activity across the farm. But we did do some soil testing 3 years ago, and we had the soil testing went down 1 metre, and we were able to show that we had roots down 1 metre in our land, but they were really fine, wispy ones. And then we just did testing 2 weeks ago, and those roots were at 1 metre down, and now the size of a stem of grass. So actually, sort of the root sizes have increased. We did moisture testing, and down to 1 metre, we were consistently averaging about 36% moisture, which for our 40-hectare farm, we calculated was 4 million litres of water being stored on our farm.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing I heard with dung beetles was that they were looking to struggle, and we really need to get our regional councils and all other bodies on board to subsidise or assist with the spread of the dung beetles. I say to people, talk to your neighbours. You go buy one species, get them to buy another species. So if over 3 or 4 farms, you could introduce 3 or 4 species, which, because of the nature of the dung beetles, they will spread, and you actually have a much greater coverage for the farms.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's fantastic. What an incredible story. Yeah.
So
Thank you,
Yeah,
Gary.
happy for people to visit, but we're also selling our farm. If anybody wants to buy a regen farm, come
Oh,
on,
no. Where are you, Gary? Where are you based?
Kaipara in Northland.
Okay.
And are you going to have another go at another farm somewhere else?
Oh, I think I'm being retired, apparently. But I'm happy to work. I'm happy to work with people in the regen space, though.
Very good. Thank you, Gary. Hannah says that Auckland Council are subsidising a release on her farm this week. And
Cool.
thanks to Paul.
Yeah. There was a question that has gone off the screen now from Sue about whether dung beetles, if there's only shallow topsoil, whether they'll be able to get down through the compaction. And yes is the answer. That's what they're made to do. They prefer to work in the subsoil. Maybe if there was if there was a pan, they may not be able to get through that. Might take them a bit longer, but yeah, definitely they will be fine in compacted soils, and they will increase the topsoil pretty rapidly once they get going.
Right, which is relevant for places that have kauri pan, like in areas of Northland. You know, the pan is so tough it'll sharpen the blade of a bulldozer working it.
Wow.
Just make it razor sharp because it
Yeah.
just wears it down. Yeah.
Yeah, and to Tracy's question, that's correct. Well, Tracy says, will they spread to the bush, or is there not enough food? And yeah, unless a cow is in the bush doing cow pads, they won't spread to the bush. They only go where they can smell the dung. So it's all about the dung. If there's no dung, they won't survive. Yeah, it's all dependent on the dung.
Fantastic. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. Are there any important points about dung beetles we haven't made?
No, I think just want to thank Gary for coming on, and that comment that Gary just made about neighbours getting together and sharing, and the importance of supporting dung beetle innovations. I mean, what we're doing is really just trying to share knowledge and support each other through sharing beetles, but especially for bigger farms, if you can afford it, or you can get together with your neighbours, and you could even just buy one colony amongst a group of neighbours. That would be something to do to support the continuation of dung beetle innovations.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
If we treat the dung beetles as being the same as your fertilizer application, just reduce, if you're putting fertilizer on your farm, reduce your fertilizer application 1 year by the cost of a dung beetle species, getting one release. And if we were all to do that, you'd find that the benefit would be such that you actually find you're not putting any fertilizer on at all. I mean, I haven't done fertilizer on my farm for 7 years.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Thank you. Someone's asking about how far south they've gone. It just reminded me that on the Dung Beetle Innovations website, there's actually a map. Was that on the website, Paul? You sent that to me, eh? Did that come off the website? A map showing where they've been released in New Zealand?
I didn't look for the map actually, but that might be worth chasing up.
I think
I
DBI
can have a
have
look now,
a
probably.
map. Yeah.
Great, that's fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you very much to the participants, and thank you to everybody who came along to watch and share and ask lovely questions. I think it was a great sharing and so much knowledge there, Bridget and Julie, and great experience. Paul and Stephen, well done for breeding up those numbers. It's just so exciting. And everybody's really positive about it. It just feels like we're really doing something, and it sort of helps heal some of that hurt for what we've done for the soil in New Zealand, and show that we care about making a difference. So well done to all four of you, and to you, Gary, for helping the spread. And well done to all the members for participating. And again, thank you very much, and hope to see you out in the paddocks or the field days, or at field days itself coming up in June in the Waikato. Yeah, very good. Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.
See ya. Good night.
Good night.